Welcome. I'm so excited to have you here tonight. We are doing a science call on the Feel Great system. And this is a science call that we have had the opportunity to share a couple times a week already with Dr. Dieter. And I'm excited to be able to bring Dr. Dieter's knowledge to this group of people. We also have a couple of guest speakers that are going to talk about their experience on the system. We're going to walk you through how to use it, and if we have a couple minutes at the end, we're going to allow some questions in the chat that you can be able to participate in. Dr. Dieter is a board certified physician, and he's going to walk through his credentials and he's going to explain to you about insulin resistance and gut dysbiosis. Dr. Dieter, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Welcome to you guys. My name is Dr. Dieter. I hold board certifications in two fields. I'm a board certified internist and I'm a board certified pediatrician. And I am thankful to have the opportunity to be able to do this science talk for the team. And so I'm going to share my screen and then we will rock and roll. Welcome. This is an issue that I have become very passionate about in the last couple of years. So I'm glad to be able to do this. So again, I'm Dr. Wayfriend. I'm a board certified internist and a board certified pediatrician. So today I'm going to talk to us about how most of the diseases that face us today in modern society are rooted in metabolic dysfunction. So I'll start with this slide. So there is now more and more evidence coming out that most, if not all, of the chronic diseases that we face today in society as a result of metabolic dysfunction. Metabolic dysfunction is just simply a fancy term to say energy shortage, okay? Energy shortage. That energy shortage is called metabolic dysfunction, and then it drives all the chronic diseases that we face. And that energy shortage, the metabolic dysfunction, is coming from two things, something we call insulin resistance and microbiome dysfunction. Those two things combine to cause metabolic dysfunction, which then cause all the diseases that we face in modern society. So what I would like to do is let's just go ahead and single each of these together. Number one, insulin resistance and microbiome dysfunction, and talk about them so that you see how they play a role in the energy shortage, the metabolic dysfunction. So, what is insulin resistance? To be able to understand what insulin resistance is important to understand what the hormone insulin does. So, insulin is a very, very critical hormone in our existence. In fact, I call insulin hormone numero uno in terms of importante. There is no hormone more important than insulin because insulin sits at the pinnacle of our body in terms of control of everything. Insulin dictates the normal functioning of the body, a very vital hormone. And why it is vital and sits at the pinnacle is so I call insulin the CEO of the body. You know, the CEO of a company dictates the structure and functioning and a smooth running of the company. And why do I call insulin the CEO and the most important hormone? Is for this reason. The job of insulin is to do this, is to mobilize glucose out of the blood into the cell. You see, when we eat, right, all the food that we eat, the end product of digestion and absorption results in glucose being released into the blood. When that glucose is released into the blood, that glucose, by the instruction of insulin, is mobilized into the cell. When glucose gets into the cell, it is now shunted into a special organelle called the mitochondria. The mitochondria. In the mitochondria, the glucose goes through a complex series of reactions called the electron transport chain. in the mitochondria, with the end result being the release of an energy molecule called ATP. ATP really stands for adenosine triphosphate. It's an energy molecule. So every system in the body requires energy to function. Think about ATP as the energy currency of the body. The cell has to pay with energy for everything. So why is insulin hormone numero uno in terms of importante? Because of this. Without insulin, we cannot make energy. And energy is needed for every function of the cell. Things do not happen in a vacuum. So now that you understand what insulin does, what then is insulin resistance? Insulin resistance, simply put, is a breakdown in this process. Anywhere where there is a breakdown in this process of insulin mobilizing glucose out of the cell, out of the blood into the cell so that energy can be made, we say you have insulin resistance. It's a breakdown. Now, how did the breakdown occur? It's important to understand how the breakdown occur. If your car breaks down and you take it to the mechanic, the first thing the mechanic does is the mechanic runs a diagnostic to understand how did George's car break down? If I understand that, then I can walk back and fix how George's car broke down. So insulin resistance is a breakdown in this process. Now, how does the breakdown of insulin resistance occur? It occurs by two processes. The first is what we call too much fat. Too much fat is the first way in which you have a breakdown. And then the first way actually then leads to the second way, too much insulin. And I'm going to explain it like this: too much insulin. We need fat, to be able to uh, as an alternate source of energy. Fat is good, too much fat is not good. Insulin is good, but too much insulin is not good. If you've ever heard it said too much of a good thing is a bad thing, well, let's use too much fat and too much insulin to demonstrate how those things are a bad thing. The body cycles between glucose and fat, glucose and fat, right? During the daytime, 80% of the body's energy needs are glucose. When we are active, our metabolic demand is high, we need glucose. At nighttime, when we're fasting, glucose levels are low. The body needs to switch to an alternate source of energy. So at nighttime, when we're fasting, the body makes that switch from glucose to fat as an alternate source of energy, so the cellular processes should continue to go on. So fat is good, and but too much fat is not good. Why is too much fat not good? I demonstrate it like this. A cell is normally supposed to look like this. When we eat, right, all the calories that we eat is converted into glucose. That glucose is then converted into glycogen by a hormone called glucose is then converted into glycogen by a hormone called glucagon. Now, what happens is that what happens is that when we eat more calories than we're supposed to, those excess calories get converted into fat. If I'm supposed to eat a certain amount of calories, and my body needs a certain amount of calories, but I consume more calories than I need, those excess calories get converted into fat. When those excess calories get converted into fat, it is more fat than the body needs. The body takes those excess calories and lumps it into this cell. This cell is normally supposed to look like this. The body takes that out, draw a replica of the cell, now takes those excess calories that have been converted into fat and lumps the fat in this cell. Okay, so this cell now becomes filled with fat. Okay, remember the job of the cell, or the job of insulin, is to command the cell to take up glucose. So in a situation where this normal cell looks like that, insulin can command this cell and the cell takes up glucose from the blood. But you have a situation where you've consumed too much calories, those excess calories have been converted into fat, and the fat has now been stuffed into this cell. With the fat stuffed in the cell, this cell now becomes what I call a fat laden cell. Okay, it's pregnant with fat, it's fat laden. Now, when insulin comes to this cell, and knocks on the door of this cell. Knock, 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 cell. I got glucose in the blood. I want you to take up that glucose in the blood and run it through the mitochondria so that energy can be produced. You know what the cell tells insulin? Are you kidding? I don't got any room in the inn. I'm filled with all this fat. Like, where do you want me to bring glucose and put it? I have no room. So the cell refuses to open its doors to the knock of insulin to bring glucose in. And remember, what is insulin resistance? Anywhere in that sequence where there's a breakdown of insulin mobilizing glucose into the cell for energy to be produced. So when that doesn't happen, you have the first step in insulin resistance. Glucose cannot go in because the cell is occupied with fat, the space where glucose will normally take. And glucose now begins to accumulate in the blood because the cell hasn't opened its doors to insulin. Glucose, 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 glucose. Now, what this cell is doing is that this cell is trying to protect itself from excess energy. Thanksgiving is coming up on soon. Is the next holiday coming on, and many of you Thanksgiving may be your second favorite holiday. Some of you is Christmas. But why do I bring up Thanksgiving? Have you ever eaten too much on Thanksgiving and felt stuffed and full? If you have ever eaten too much on Thanksgiving, drop a comment in the chat. Stuffed on Thanksgiving or stuffed. This cell, this fat laden cell, is feeling like somebody who has eaten too much on Thanksgiving. When you have stuffed yourself too much on Thanksgiving, you feel like, oh man, I wish I did not eat that much. You just feel that stuff. The last thing in the world when you're feeling Thanksgiving stuff is to put another bite of anything in your mouth, whether that bite is your favorite pecan pie in the world. That's the last thing in the world. This is exactly how this fat laden cell is feeling. It is so stuffed with fat, even though it desires to take in glucose to make energy. The last thing in the world is to bring in more glucose, more calories into it to stuff it already. So it says, no, no. So you could understand how the cell is feeling if you have ever been stuffed on Thanksgiving. So what happens is that glucose accumulates in the blood. Now, there is a one-to-one relationship between the concentration of glucose and the amount of insulin produced by the pancreas. When glucose is high, insulin concentration produced by the pancreas goes high. So you now have this cell that said no to insulin and glucose accumulated in the blood like this. That glucose that accumulated in the blood now becomes a trigger to the pancreas and triggers the pancreas to produce too much insulin. Okay? Too much insulin. Guys, too much insulin is no bueno. Insulin is good and is a very critical hormone, but too much of it is no bueno. Why? Remember, at the start of this, I described insulin like being the CEO of the body that dictates structure and functioning of the body. Now think about it. If you have when insulin becomes high, too much, it becomes like a CEO of a company who comes into work one day and has lost it. A screw has gotten missing in his head. It's the boss has become erratic, cuckoo. He comes into work, he's backing orders to people, yelling, shoving people in the hallway, giving people unreasonable demands, and has just gone from being a level-headed boss that dictates the smooth functioning of the company to a boss that has gone cuckoo. Now, you all have bosses if you have a job, or if you've had a job in the past, you've had a supervisor over you. When you lose respect for your boss, like when a boss is acting that way, you lose your respect for them. Like if I had a boss and the boss became unreasonable, became tyrannical, a bully, yelling and at me in the hallway or what have you, I'll lose my respect for my boss. And if you lose respect for your boss, is it easy for you to do what the boss tells you to do after you have lost respect for the boss, or is it hard? It's hard, right? Because you no longer have respect for the boss. So this is the scenario when insulin is running high, insulin is acting like a bully and a tyrant of a CEO, and the employees of the CEO lose their respect for the CEO. Hey, boss man has gone cuckoo, and they don't have the same respect they initially got. Same as the cell. When insulin is running high, insulin is acting like a bully to the cell, telling the cell, yelling in the ear of the cell, telling the cell, you're going to do what I tell you to do, when I tell you to do, being tyrannical. And the cell doesn't take too kindly to that. The cell loses its respect for insulin. And when the cell loses its respect for insulin, the cell doesn't do the number one thing that insulin asks the cell to do, which is, hey, cell, knock, 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 it's me, insulin. Open the door so that I can let glucose in. Because the cell has lost respect for insulin because insulin is tyrannical, bullying it around. When insulin knocks the door, then the cell hears insulin knocking, the cell closes the door or makes the door narrower and makes it harder for to get glucose to come into the cell. That is what too much insulin does. Now, when that happens, right, when the cell closes its doors even more, it causes the concentration of glucose in the blood to accumulate even more. The cell has lost its respect for insulin. It has tightened its door and making less and less glucose get into the cell. So more and more glucose is accumulating in the blood. Okay. That more glucose that accumulates in the blood is a further trigger to the pancreas to produce even more insulin. Oh, that's not good. Even more insulin is like a CEO that was cuckoo at this level and raises their cuckoo level to here, above the head. The employees of that CEO who had initially lost respect for the CEO lose even more respect for the CEO. Translate, the cells lose even more respect for insulin. So they close their doors even tighter because insulin is even more tyrannical. And that just causes a vicious process. They've tightened their doors, glucose accumulates in the blood again, just like that. And you just have that vicious process on and on and on. So that's how too much fat and too much insulin results in insulin resistance. Now, take note of that because when we start talking about the field grade system, you will see how the field grade system addresses these two components to reverse insulin resistance. So when you now have insulin resistance, it now translates into a slew of diseases. All of these diseases as a result of energy shortage, the shortage of ATP. Every cell requires energy to function. When a cell doesn't have the energy it needs to function, it malfunctions. The simple definition of a disease is a malfunctioned cell. That's a simple definition of a disease. Cells make tissues, tissues make organs, organs make system. So the smallest entity of all those things is a cell. So definition of a disease, a cell that has malfunctioned. Why did the cell malfunction? Because of lack of energy. So when you have insulin resistance, all of these diseases come into play. We spoke about the second thing, microbiome dysfunction, which is called dysbiosis. Let's talk about that. To be able to understand what dysbiosis is or microbiome dysfunction, I want to first make you guys understand what the microbiome is. So the microbiome is a microbial population of about 30 to 100 trillion bacteria that live in our gut. Okay, and we live in what we call a symbiotic relationship with them. We do for them, they do for you, quid quo pro, if you may put it. So what we do for these bacteria is we provide them food and shelter, and then in turn they help to do all of these functions, help to break down fiber, help to protect the gut from pathogenic bacteria. Pathogenic just simply means disease causing. And the way these microorganisms, this 30 to 100 trillion bacteria do it, they produce a very special fatty acid called a short chain fatty acid. Short chain fatty acids cannot be gotten from foods or anything. They're only produced by the bacteria in the gut. So this short chain fatty acid is like the security system of the security guard of the gut. It goes to reinforce the checkpoint. So our gut cells are lined together one to another. Think about my fist as a place called a tight junction of the cell. Okay, these short chain fatty acids go to this area of the tight junction and tighten it, keep it very tight, cell to cell, so that there is no weakness. And when there is no weakness, stuff cannot spill out of the colon into the blood. But if those short chain fatty acids do not secure the weakness, they do not secure the tightness there, this area becomes loose. When that area becomes loose, bacteria seeps through the colon into the blood. Think about it like this. Um, so this is a tight junction right here. And the tight junction is secured by the short chain fatty acids. If the tight junction is not secured, what happens is there are gaps that open, a little gap that opens like this. This is a cell, this is another cell. Bacteria can now seep in. So that's one of the functions, producing short chain fatty acids. The other thing it does is that it helps to regulate the immune system. You may not know it, but 70% of the body's immune system resides in the gut. The other 30% resides in the lymphatics, the lymph nodes, the bone marrow. Um, these microorganisms, the microbiome, are in charge of training the immune system to have an appropriate response to things. The immune system is our defense line, helps to protect us from diseases and what have you. So how does the microbiome help to regulate and train the immune system? It looks like this. If let's say there is a bacteria, the microbiome tells the bacteria, hey, sorry, tells the immune system, hey, you see that bacteria there? That guy's a bad guy. At the first sign that you see him, blow his head off, okay? And use a shotgun for him. Just a shotgun will do. You don't need to be too crazy. You don't need to pull out an AK-47 for him. Just a little handgun will take care of him. You see that other bacteria there? A handgun will not do. You need to be a bit more aggressive. Maybe pull out a grenade or an AK-47. Now look, you see that other guy there? He looks like a bacteria, but he's not a bacteria. He's in camo. He's part of us. He's wearing camouflage. Don't attack him. He's part of the body cells. And that's a healthy training that the microbiome does to the immune system when the microbiome is healthy. The unhealthy training looks like this. Hey, you see that bacteria right there? He's a bad guy. You could probably take him out with a handgun, but don't use a handgun. Take him out with an AK-47. Just overpower him. It causes the immune system to be trigger happy. You see that other guy right there? It looks like he may be in camo, but you know what? We don't have time to really ask whether he's in camo or not. Just blow his head off. We're going to do an autopsy later and find out. So it trains the immune system to shoot first and ask questions later. Even if it says, if you see something that just looks like a bacteria, even though it may not be, just blow his head off. So it causes the immune system to now have a trigger happy finger and a cell that may be in camouflage. It may be your colon cell, it may be your thyroid cell, it may be your lung cell, that the immune system now attacks because it's trigger happy, and destroys it. And that's how autoimmune diseases develop from a trigger happy immune system as a result of an unhealthy microbiome. And the last thing is that it helps in the synthesis of B vitamins and B vitamins and K vitamins. Now, understanding the microbiome, dysbiosis is then the definition is when you have an imbalance in the microbial population. You see, there is bad and good bacteria in the gut. They are supposed to exist in 50-50. They're supposed to kind of keep each other in check. The good and the bad, 50-50% population. Dysbiosis or microbiome dysfunction is when the bad bacteria outnumber the good bacteria and the good bacteria become low. Why does that happen? The main reason why that happens is a shortage of food. Okay. When there is a shortage of food, first of all, the food for the microbiome is fiber. And unfortunately, in our day and age, with our foods being so processed, we're not consuming enough fiber. Because we don't take in enough fiber, that shortage of food, which is the chow for the microbiome, causes survival of the fetus to set into play. When survival of the fetus sets into play, the bad bacteria that are usually the stronger bacteria are gonna hoard the food. When they hoard the food to keep their hold and they grab on the food, they said, let's go ahead and increase our army so that we can keep our hold on the food. So they increase their army, they increase their population at the expense, of the good bacteria. And that results in imbalance. And when you have imbalance, it's dysbiosis. And it results in this slew of illnesses like this. Remember, I spoke about the trigger happy immune system. Many of these diseases on here are autoimmune diseases. Lupus is an autoimmune disease, is the immune system attacking the body cells. Hashimoto is an autoimmune disease. MS is an autoimmune disease. Celiac, an autoimmune disease. So, coming from dysbiosis, that imbalance, you may be surprised to see anxiety and depression on this list. I was surprised when I was learning this stuff that anxiety and depression were related to the gut. But when I learned about it more, it made sense. You may not know it, but 90%, 90% of the hormone or the neurotransmitter serotonin, 90% is produced in the gut. The remaining 10% is produced in the central nervous system. Okay. So if 90% of this hormone that is important in maintaining our mood is produced in the gut, when you have dysbiosis, the factory is down. When the factory is down, the factory doesn't produce its product. If the factory doesn't produce its product, no wonder you have anxiety and depression. So those are the some of the diseases that are as a result of this viruses. And this slide is not big enough. If we cannot find a slide large enough to feed all the diseases or conditions that are related to this viruses, it's a depiction of some of the diseases that may come as a result. Now, this slide I call the metabolic sequence of disease, insulin resistance and dysbiosis. Dysbiosis has to be on here. Insulin resistance and dysbiosis result in energy, metabolic dysfunction, lack of energy or energy shortage, which then results in oxidative stress and injury to the cell. The cell is injured here. The injured cell now cries to the immune system, and an inflammatory response is deployed. When the immune system deploys the inflammatory response to rescue the cell, it comes to the cell here, but what it sees is smoke. It doesn't see fire, and the fire actually started 2 houses ago at insulin resistance, spread to metabolic dysfunction, and then spread to the cell. But there's only smoke here. And so the inflammatory response does not bring about any resolution of the issue. And this issue continues unresolved. It continues to result in this inflammation, 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 inflammation. You have a chronic inflammatory state that results in disease or symptom condition, like a chronic fire burning in you. Now, there is good news. I know all of this could sound depressing, but there is good news because we now have more and more evidence that reversal of the insulin resistance, the core of the problem, and the dysbiosis will cause a reversal of the disease condition. If I gave you a time machine and I said, Amory, go back 100 years, in the past, and look at how your great 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 grandfather or your great 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 grandmother was living in their times, and come back and report to me whether there was dysbiosis or diabetes or high blood pressure. When you take that time machine and go back 100 years and you come back, you're going to say, hey, Dr. Dieter, I found no type 2 diabetes. I found no CAD. I found no anxiety and depression, or I found none of this. And the reasons being that, their lifestyles, what they did and ate, did not result in insulin resistance. So we are seeing all of these diseases because of our lifestyles. And um, our ancestors did not have those diseases because they did not live those lifestyles. But the news is good because if we could simulate what our ancestors did, then we could take care of the dysbiosis and reverse the insulin resistance, and then those conditions will go away and we'll be as healthy as our ancestors. And I put it this way: imagine you're riding in a car and that car stops. What happens is when the car runs out of gas, it's going to stop. How many of you guys have ever run out of gas? I ran out of gas about 3 times, and the last time I ran out of gas was about maybe 2012. I had to call a girlfriend to bail me out. She was embarrassed for me myself. I've never run out of gas again, but when you run out of gas, the car stops. The car stops not because there is intrinsic failure of the engine. No, the car stops because its power source is gone. The energy, the gas, to fuel the engine to go is no longer there. So if you walk to, let's say you're 5-10 minutes from the nearest gas station, you walk 5-10 minutes to that gas station, you buy a gallon of gas, and you walk back to your car on the side of the road. When you pump gas in that car, you go back and sit in the driver's seat and turn on the ignition, you hear this beautiful sound again. The car roars back to life again. If any of you guys have ever ran out of gas, when you put gas back in your car, you don't even have a second thought, oh, would the car start? That thought is not there because it's just so automatic. It stopped because it ran out of gas. I put gas. You're never weary that, oh, what if this car doesn't start? It's the same with the body. When the body runs out of energy, we have these disease processes. If you restore the energy just by putting gas in that car, those diseases go poof. Your diabetes, poof, gone. Your high blood pressure, poof, gone. Your sleep apnea, poof, gone. Your obesity, poof, gone. Because you reverse the core of the problem, the disease condition goes away. And so I bring you the solution, the feel great system. What is the feel great system? The feel great system is a nutraceutical product. When we talk about a nutraceutical is a product made 100% from plants, but has health benefits more than it has nutritional benefits. So that's what a nutraceutical is. And this feel great system uses the science of intermittent fasting, and lipolysis and dysbiosis, and the science of intermittent fasting and lipolysis and fiber supplementation to reverse insulin resistance and reverse dysbiosis. And so it's taking care of the core of the problem. And how does it do that, you may ask? First, let's talk about each one of them separately. The first product in the in this system, the Unimate, is made from a plant that is native to South America called the yerba mate plant. The yerba mate plant. The yerba mate plant is rich in a very special phytonutrient called chlorogenic acid. Chlorogenic acid is a polyphenol, okay? Our ancestors ate a lot of natural foods that were rich in polyphenols, and so they never had insulin resistance. So it's a polyphenol. And what chlorogenic acid does as a polyphenol is that it causes the breakdown of fat. In medical terms, we'll say lipolysis. Now, why is that useful? Let's go back to how we developed insulin resistance. So, we developed insulin resistance by a two-step process where you had a cell that was fat laden and could not take up glucose from the blood at all. Okay, and it caused glucose to accumulate in the blood because it could not take up glucose. Now, you have the Unimate, this product, which causes lipolysis. The polyphenol in it causes lipolysis, a fancy medical term to say fat burning, to burn fat, fat burning. Okay. So when you consume the yerba mate or the Unimate product, it goes and causes lipolysis, and this cell that was pregnant with fat, begins to burn the fat that is in it. It transforms to looking like this, and then later, all of a sudden, as lipolysis continues to occur, the cell now goes back to normal. It's free of all the fat. Now that it is free of all the fat, it could take in all the glucose in the blood that was accumulated. Even this cell can begin to take in glucose, but this cell is totally free and has gone back to status quo. All the glucose in the blood that accumulated in the cell is now able to go into the cell, and that glucose now goes through the electron transport chain to make ATP or reversing insulin resistance, just because of fat burning, Unimate causing fat burning. It reverses the first step of insulin resistance. Then the second thing is that because the first step resulted in the second step of insulin resistance, it also results in the resolution of the second step. When glucose in the blood is now taken up by the cell, the glucose concentration in the blood drops. When the glucose concentration in the blood drops because of the one-to-one relationship between insulin, glucose concentration and insulin secretion, the too much insulin now becomes too little into low insulin. It triggers the pancreas now to decrease the amount of insulin producing it produces. So you now go to low insulin. You know what low insulin is like? Low insulin is like that boss that was initially cuckoo that comes to his senses and now goes back level-headed and goes back to his employees and said, listen, guys, I know I've been a jerk for the last 1 or 2 months, giving you unreasonable orders, yelling at you left, right, and center. I am sorry. With a contrite heart, I am sorry. Will you forgive me? When the employees of that CEO hear that kind of humility, they're immediately taken by it. They forgive the CEO, they gain their respect back for the CEO, and are able now to do what the CEO asked them to do with welcoming hands. Translates to the cell. When insulin becomes low, insulin is no longer acting as a bully and a tyrant to the cell. It has become like that CEO that says, I was a jerk, or like that bully on the playground that had been bullying the kids on the playground that comes to the kids and say, hey, I'm sorry I've been bullying you around. Will you forgive me? Kids are very forgiving. A bully asks for forgiveness with a contrite heart. I can walk with him now. The cell now says, I can walk with that insulin guy. It opens his doors now for more glucose to come in, reversing the second state of insulin resistance. Now, the second product in the protocol, the the balance is just simply fiber. We need fiber. Fiber is important in insulin resistance, and this is made out of fiber taken from 5 different plants, merged together in a spatial polysaccharide matrix. And fiber plays a very huge role in reversing insulin resistance. It does exactly the same thing that a Unimate does, exactly the same thing. But the other thing that fiber does is that fiber helps to decrease the spike in your blood sugar. But I'll explain it like this. If food is supposed to move through the colon by this speed, fiber causes food to move through the colon by this speed. The fast movement of food through the colon results in fast digestion, fast absorption, fast release of glucose into the blood. The slow movement of food through the colon results in slow digestion, slow absorption, and slow release of glucose in the blood. I put it this way. Let's say you and I wanted to eat lasagna one evening, and we go out to Olive Garden, an Italian restaurant to eat lasagna. And we both order the same plate of lasagna, and that's you. We both order the same plate of lasagna, and that's you, and that's me. and I know a thing or two about fiber, and you don't know a thing or two about fiber, and you go ahead and you order your lasagna and you eat the plate of lasagna, your blood sugar is going to do this, and that blood sugar spike may be 180. For me, I know a thing or two about fiber, and I know that the balanced product contains fiber is going to bring down my glucose, when I eat, when I take it. I take the balanced product first, and then I consume that same plate of lasagna. This is what my blood sugar is going to do. Same quantity of lasagna, my blood sugar is going to do that. And that blood sugar day may be a blood sugar of 90. You and I have eaten the same plate of lasagna, but because I consume fiber first, which is in this product, before consuming my plate of lasagna, my blood sugar went to 90, yours went to 180. Why is that important? The implications of that is the one-to-one relationship between glucose concentration and insulin secretion. Because your blood sugar has gone up to 180, your pancreas is going to produce a commensurate higher amount of insulin to deal with that blood sugar. So your pancreas may produce 20 units of insulin right here, okay? 20 units. For me, because my blood sugar has only gone up to 90, my pancreas is going to produce a commensurate lower amount of insulin to deal with that blood sugar. And for me, my pancreas may only decide to produce 5 units of insulin. I want you to think about 20 units of insulin like the cuckoo CEO, the CEO who had gone nuts, okay? And think about 5 units of insulin like the level-headed CEO. Level-headed CEO. The cell is more likely to be responsive here, will be more sensitive to insulin here. And here you'll be more resistant to insulin because of this cuckoo CEO compared to this level-headed CEO. And that's what fiber does to you. The last thing that fiber does is that fiber is food for the microbiome. So we have talked about how we have talked about how the Unimate and the balance helps in reversing insulin resistance. Fiber does dysbiosis, helps in reversing dysbiosis because fiber is food for the microbiome. Every living organism, whether it's a lion in the jungle of Africa, a bacteria in your gut needs food. And when you feed the bacteria in the gut fiber, there is food enough for the good and the bad. Happy, everybody is happy, enough food to go around, and it prevents you from developing dysbiosis. Or if you have dysbiosis, it now reverses that dysbiosis when there is more food. So I end by saying this: the feel great system offers a solution, for us to be able to reverse the root causes of the chronic diseases that face us in modern society: insulin resistance and dysbiosis. And that is good news. So if you suffer from any chronic medical conditions related to dysbiosis or any chronic medical conditions related to insulin resistance, just like that car that started again when gas was put into it, if you restore the energy balance by reversing insulin resistance and dysbiosis, you could reclaim your health again and begin to thrive again. And that's what the Feel Great system offers for you. Thank you very much, Emery. I'll end here and I will pass it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to leave you spot on spotlight. I'm going to show you an example of some additional proof of how people who have used this system have really had an opportunity to change their health. Let me start by just giving you a couple of examples. The first one is our speaker here tonight is a doctor, and this is before he had discovered intermittent fasting. This picture on the left. Then he learned about this is 5 years of regular intermittent fasting and jogging 3 times a week. Then the difference between this black jacket and the pink jacket is 2.5 months using the Feel Great system, the Unimate and Balance. So you can see the difference. It's in his look, his inflammation, what has happened with his body. I want to show you a couple more examples. This is 35 days on the system, someone who was actually hospitalized with insulin resistance issues. And coming out of the hospital, getting on the Feel Great system, 35 days later, you can see the difference in body mass inflammation reduced. So this is Kimberly, And this is 60 days from the time that she started the system until this picture. She was getting ready for a wedding. And you can see how inflammation can quickly be reduced with this system. This is Angelita. She is a nurse practitioner, and you can see that she was thin to start off with. And this is a couple months using the system. But what was so significant for her is that she had been on depression, anxiety medications for almost a decade before she found the Feel Great system. When she started using this in a couple months for the first time, she did not need to refill her prescription for the depression and anxiety, which came as a surprise to her. And now she continues months later, almost, I think, 8 months on the system, still feeling amazing. This is my friend Dr. Marla. She's probably on this call. This was her on a cruise. And what she realized, she was walking with a cane when she was on this cruise. And you can see here, she looks like we call her kind of the Aunt Mabel picture here. 3.5 months after starting this system, she looks like she has aged backwards 10, 15 years. She's in her 70s. She's able to go hiking, got rid of long COVID symptoms, inflammation, and normalized her blood work. Continues to age backwards. This is Jonathan. He is an NFL, a former NFL player. And so he's a big guy. He lost 50 pounds in 50 days using this system. And it's not just a weight loss system, but he had psoriasis, which is a sign of insulin resistance, but gut dysbiosis all over the back of his head, his neck, his arms. And what he found, I don't have pictures of him, but I can show you, was within 50 days, he had no more symptoms of psoriasis. And this is something he'd been struggling with for 20 years. But this is a picture of Claudia's psoriasis. Claudia had been suffering with psoriasis for since the time she was a teenager. This now she's 63 years old, but just a couple months using the system. And then she also added omega-3 fatty acids. And what she saw, the difference in her skin from here to here is significant. This is how significant weight loss can be when you're looking at Ozempic or Wegovy, the weight loss injections, but they all have side effects to them. This is no side effects, but you can see significant weight loss. And when you lose weight with this system, you don't end up with the hanging skin where you have to go get a $10,000 surgery in order to deal with the hanging skin. You're able to see the difference. Jimmy may be on here. No more meds, had high blood pressure, IBS for as long as he can remember. That's irritable bowel syndrome, meaning you eat and your stomach is growling, grumbling. You have to go to the restroom quickly. Acid reflux gone, migraines gone, insomnia gone down 2 pant sizes, 2 shirt sizes, and is no longer a type 2 diabetic. So reversed type 2 diabetes in about 90 days on the system. Same here. This is Roe. Had A1C over 14 and now has normal A1C. It's continued to drop below 5.9. The next thing I want to talk about, I did that without warning you, but I do want to talk about Keith. Keith, I'm going to pull you on to this call and talk about the spotlight. I want to show you a real live user of this system. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to go back with a warning, sorry, and show you his foot ulcer. And the reason to, Dr. Dear, if you can help me explain this as well, is we want you to see the severity of what can go on when you have type 2 diabetes. And someone said, when you have untreated type 2 diabetes, but that's not the case here. Keith was being treated by medical professionals for type 2 diabetes, 25 years as a type 2 diabetic on insulin 90% of that time. When he started using the system, Keith, how many days did it take on this system after 108 units of insulin, injections 6 times a day? How many days did it take you on the system before you no longer needed insulin?
It took two. It was historically it was pretty religious that it was during the day about 300, sometimes a little more. But yeah, after I started the protocol on day two, I was able, my blood sugars were hovering right about normal range, which is about 90 to 100 from what I was taught. Um, and so yeah, it made a significant difference. It literally within hours of taking it. I think I started taking it the day before in the morning. By lunch, I had more energy. I was used to sitting around just half falling asleep, and and that all went away immediately. The insulin went away immediately. Um, I don't know if you have
Yeah,
the
I'm gonna jump to there's a couple of things I want to cover. We're gonna cover eyesight and we're gonna cover the foot ulcer. So now that I'm warning you, this is what a type 2 diabetes foot ulcer looks like. And again, this is under doctor's treatment. This is not untreated. This is someone who is seeking treatment for this. And so, Keith, in January, this was the foot ulcer that took your life and you
yep,
were resuscitated. They brought you back to life, took you in the ICU, and you could put a glove on and feel bone inside of this. Then I'm gonna skip to this is after you've been resuscitated, you have started with foot healing, you're in a hyperbaric chamber, 45-minute driving to a hyperbaric chamber, hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on
yep,
this. This is how well your foot had healed when you found the feel great system. And
yes.
in June, you started on the system. And I'm going to show this is from the time that before he started the system, how well it has healed. And then this, just to give you the summary, this is what his foot looks like now. When did we take this picture? About 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago?
Yeah, something like that, 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Hmm.
But yeah, they found the ulcer in December of last year, and then that's where it was at when I went in the hospital. And then the next photo was after 2 months hyperbaric chamber, uh, wound vacs, and it was just it wasn't healing. And then I started the protocol, and in about 6 weeks, 6, 7 weeks, that's what my foot healed into.
Hmm. And so from the time you started this system, you were in one of those knee wheelchair,
Hmm.
put on your knee and moved it along. So now
Yep.
you're off of how many meds were you on before you started?
I was on 15 meds. Um, and within the first 60 days, I was off all but I think one. And since the 90 days, and actually maybe a week after the 90 days, I am 100% drug free. I don't take any drugs. In fact, I used to pull up to Walgreens and they knew your name without even having to tell you anything. And they're like, "Oh, hey, here's your stuff." And yeah, it's actually quite nice not having to pay the copays.
Hmm. That is exciting. Yeah, because they knew you at McDonald's drive through in the morning, which you don't go there anymore, and you
Nope.
also are not driving through the pharmacy in the morning. Let's talk about vision. Let's talk about eyesight. It is not uncommon for type 2 diabetes to take people's eyesight. And let's talk a little bit about your eyesight and where you were.
Before I started, I was struggling. I couldn't drive without glasses, period. In fact, I couldn't probably see farther than 10 or 15 feet in front of me. Um, and my eyes had been bleeding for quite some time, the last couple years. And I was getting injections in both eyes every other month just to try and stop the bleeding. And um, when I saw my doctor after the 90 days or right around that time, the back of my eye is smooth as glass. It's actually my eyesight's improved. I barely even wear my glasses anymore. And he said that's the best these have looked in over 4 years.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. So getting sight back, you don't need glasses anymore. Other things, we talked about energy. We talked about you laying on the couch feeling like you were not going to be able to move. The other thing that we talked about all the time, when I first met Keith, which was only a couple of months ago, I thought he was 65 years old at least. And I embarrassed myself because I was like, well, yes, something I mistakenly said something about how old I thought he was. And since we only met a couple months ago, and now Keith is 54, but he could pull off. I mean, he could pull off a 40-year-old now. And so we see people's, once they get the insulin out, we see people aging backwards. They're looking so much better. And I want to also, George, pull you in because I wanted to give another example of George. This is not just for type 2 diabetics, for insulin resistance, does everything that Dr. Diener had shared with you. But I wanted to give you another example of of George had a fasting blood glucose over 800, and he was also a little bit heavy, type 2 diabetic. You'd had a chance to indulge in the American diet. Tell us your story, George.
Hey, great. Thank you very much. Emery, I've been a chronic yo-yo dieter for as long as I can remember, which led me down the path without me even knowing it to diabetes. And I did have a fasting A1C of 18.1 and a fasting blood glucose of 834. I should be dead. I mean, I literally should be dead. Those are beyond critical emergency care is necessary immediately. And God saved me, just like God saved me to be on this mission to help educate and teach others. Because in 107 days on this protocol, all natural protocol, it changed my life. My fasting blood glucose was 90. I did all this with no medications. I believe food got us into this mess. Food will get us out of it. And in a few months, I lost 14 inches off my waist down to a 28-inch pant. I've gained at 73 now. I'm doing the reverse. Everything I do is backwards, right, Keith? At 73 years old, I've gained 9 pounds of lean muscle. So I'm at 30% lean muscle mass. Body fat's 18.9. I'm certainly not going to be Brad Pitt or John James, but by golly, for 73, not bad.
That is great. I love that example. 73 years old. No one is going to wilt away on the system. It's not a weight loss system, but someone that doesn't need to do that. Someone said, what if you don't have, what if you're the 7% in the United States that don't have insulin resistance? People feel better. They have more energy. And just in our last couple of minutes, the two things I wanted to address was fiber, adding fiber, what that feels like if someone has some digestive issues as they start, and then just overall how to take it. So, how to use the system. It's really quite simple. And Keith, I love how you walk us through specifically I love to interview Keith on specifically exactly what did Keith do in order to get this result. Keith, can you just walk us through your day?
Of course. When I wake up first thing in the morning, I take a tea and I mix it up. You get a bottle, tells you exactly where to put the water levels for the tea and the fiber. And then I sip on that until lunch. And if I'm hungry, I might eat, I might not. And then at that point, I mix up the second tea. I drink it till dinner. And depending on what I'm eating, typically I just take one fiber. Uh, I know Dr. Kenny likes his pizza, and I do the same. To where if I have pizza, I'll might take an extra fiber just to curb me from eating the entire pizza. But and then usually in the at dinner time after dinner, I should say, I'll mix up. Sometimes I mix up a third tea, which carries over till the next day, and I just keep it on my nightstand. So if I wake up and I've got a little craving, I can just take a sip and peacefully go back to bed. And it literally is that easy, other than you want to make sure and use proper food order because that'll lower your blood sugars by an extra 43%. But you want your fats, your veggies, your meats, and then if you want carbs, I still love carbs. I just don't, I eat them dead last. So by the time I eat them, the other thing is that the fiber keeps you satiated much longer. So it's so simple. And I thought I was going to struggle being that I went to McDonald's every single morning, and it was surprisingly easy.
I love it. Thank you so much. And we also have a question about type 1 diabetes. Dr. Eater, can you just talk a little bit about when you first add fiber back into your diet? Some people see digestive issues. Can you talk about like, well, how long, what's normal, and how long may they see that?
Yeah, so it's really dependent. It's patient dependent, based on where you are in your dysbiosis profile. Some people start the fiber and have no issues at all. Some people do, and they have issues with constipation, bloating, which may last on average is about 1 to 2 weeks. I personally had constipation for 12 days And by the 13th day, my constipation was gone. So what's really happening is that your colon is trying to get acclimatized to that amount of fiber. A man is supposed to take in at least 38 grams of fiber a day. A woman is supposed to take in at least 25 grams of fiber a day. In the US, because our foods are so processed, the NIH reports that the average man and woman is taking in 10 to 12 grams of fiber a day. So that's about less than 50% of the required dietary amount. So when you start consuming this fiber, you're now close to the required dietary amount that your colon has not seen in decades. So your colon is like, whoa, what's up there? What is this that you're giving me? So your colon should have been seeing this and be used to it, but it has not seen it in years and years and years. So it's gonna take some adjusting of the colon. Some adjusting of the colon to acclimatize to that load of fiber. Most people typically is within 1 to 2 weeks. Some people it stretches to 3 to 4 weeks, but a lot of people fall in the 1 to 2 weeks. It's a transient period of bloating or constipation that goes away once your colon acclimatizes to that fiber load.
Hmm.
So
And there's two things. So Dr. Dieter is not saying that he did not have a bowel movement for 12 days, but he struggled, like he could
that's
feel
correct.
constipated doesn't mean
Exactly,
blocked.
exactly.
It
Thanks for
means,
clarifying that. Yeah, it's not that I didn't have a bowel movement for 12 days. I had symptoms of constipation for 12 days. I was, straining to poop, and my frequency of going to the bathroom went from daily to every 3 days, doing those 12-day period. Yeah.
Mhm. And when you stop and you start the whole process over. It's better to be consistent. And if you're struggling, slow down to part of a packet of balance versus stopping. Because every time you stop, all of that good microbiome has to rebuild. Your body has to reacclimate. So if you're struggling and you're uncomfortable, just reduce the amount that you're taking, but keep using it. Get through to the other side. Every single person gets through to the other side and has an improved gut health. There's one final question. We're a little bit over time. Type 1 diabetes. How does this work for type 1 diabetics?
Wonderful. First of all, a lot of type 1 diabetics, have a component of type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance. Okay. So if you just have to take the component of type 1 diabetes, they're requiring a high amount of insulin. They're requiring insulin, to deal with their genetic insulin deficiency. Then you add on the component of type 2 diabetes, which is insulin resistance, playing a second role in how much insulin. Insulin resistance means that if you need 2 units of insulin to do the job, to do a particular job of a blood, to move a blood sugar. Insulin resistance then now means that 2 unit is not enough. You now need 5 units of insulin to do that same job that 2 units will do. So that's what insulin resistance is, that a lot of type 2 diabetics, type 1 diabetics also have. So what this does, because fiber goes and blunts your glycemic index, if you will remember the lasagna graph I was showing you between you and I eating lasagna, when it blunts your glycemic index, if a type 1 diabetic's blood sugar, had to go up to 180 with eating lasagna, okay, and you consume the fiber, and it went up to 90, then they are going to need less insulin to be able to address that blood sugar than the 180. So we see that even in our type 1 diabetics, they're having a drastic reduction in the amount of daily insulin. I had a type 1 diabetic who had been on the product for 4 days and sent me a text message. She was elated that she had dropped her total insulin by 50 units, by 50%, sorry, in just 4 days.
Yeah,
So
that's
that's a lot
amazing.
of utility in type 1 diabetics
It
too.
is. It is a big difference. I love that. So thank you so much. We've gone a few minutes over. We really appreciate the questions, the conversation, and all that you brought today. If you're interested in trying it, the person that invited you can share with you how to get the product if you're not already using it. We do a science call Every Tuesday night, Dr. Dieter gives a science presentation on Sunday, Mondays, and Fridays at 7 p.m. Central. If you would like to see this again, if you have someone that you think would be helped by this message. So thank you so much for being on tonight. Thank you, Dr. Dieter. Thank you, Keith, and thank you, George, for being here as well. Good night.